Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented, all that kind of stuff. So yes, I think it went down quite nicely. Got some nice emails from the various independents involved, and I certainly didn't get an email from Victoria pointing out how I should be tasting whiskey. So one imagines she was quite happy with the reviews of the two Dram Moor samples. So. On to this week's episode of the show. It was kind of, I suppose, inspired a bit by last week's episode of the show. Obviously, I had the Golden Cask Ben Nevis in the lineup, and said bottling is now available from a certain whiskey emporium, and of course, as per usual, although I haven't mentioned it for a while, any comments I do make during this week's episode of the show are wholly my own and have no bearing or relevance to the company that employs me. Not that I've had any problems for quite some time now, in actual fact, which is quite nice. But then obviously I like to do episodes of the show and review stuff that's really nice and everybody's happy, and I don't get a load of grief. So yeah, but. Obviously, as you're well aware, all the tastings, I give a fair appraisal, should we say. So if I think there's maybe something slightly amiss with the sample, I'll obviously point that out. I'm not going to basically sugarcoat things, shall we say. But anyway, so... Right, coming back to this week's episode of the show, obviously it's about Ben Nevis, as you can see from the title page, and I kind of, a few months ago when I was having a sort of box rummaging session, I put together a number of groupings of samples for episodes of the show, and this was obviously one of them. It contains probably the last samples of Ben Nevis that I've probably got, and they all come from either the World Whisky Awards or from the time that I was doing the new releases tastings for the Whisky magazine, so almost 10 years ago now. Can you believe that? So yes, probably not going to do an episode of the show of this calibre again on Ben Nevis. I have done an episode of the show a couple of years ago on them, so I won't need to do any waffle about history and all that kind of stuff, because I'm pretty certain I covered that one the first time around. So I'm just going to sort of introduce today's lineup. Right, okay, so the first bottling we're going to start with is a 16-year-old single cask Ben Nevis from Master of Malt in their single cask series. Refill Bourbon Hoggy 448, distilled in October of 1996, bottled in July of 2013 at 57.4%, and although it's been hanging around for over 10 years now, I've stuck my nose in, it's still alive and kicking. Bottling number 2 is a distillery bottling. This is a single white port cask, number 336. It's a 12-year-old, distilled in December of 2002, bottled in February 2015, and bottled at 56.3%. Next bottling, again another distillery bottling, a single cask bottling from September 2000, bottled in November of 2015, so a 15-year-old single refill sherry puncheon, number 737, bottled at 59.7%. Excuse me. Next bottling we'll be moving on to is a Darkness, Maverick Drinks Darkness Ben Nevis 17-year-old. It's it's been finished in an ex-Paolo Catado sherry cask, cask number 1494, bottled at 49%, and released, I believe, somewhere during sort of probably bottled and released around about 2015. Penultimate bottling is from an independent bottling company that I've never heard of before. I think I reviewed this for the Whisky magazine. It's a Grindlay's Selection single cask release Ben Nevis 18-year-old, distilled in 1997, bottled in 2016, 52.6%. Don't have a cask number, and I believe Oloroso sherry, although I don't have a note of that. Final bottling of the day is back to the distillery, and this was a very, very special bottling called Mr. Taketsuru's Cask. So it was rejuvenated ex-bourbon barrel number 1. It was bottled to celebrate the 25th anniversary of Nikka's ownership of the distillery, and this was the first cask that was filled by Taketsuru after the distillery was purchased. So it dates from September 1990, obviously bottled in October of 2015, 25-year-old, and bottled at 61.3%. At that age, I mean, wow, was that one hell of a tight cask. So yes, rejuvenated and well glued back together, I think. So yes, we're going to finish off with that. Incidentally, if you actually wanted to buy this bottle, it is still available, apparently in a shop called the Dunda store in Poland, but apparently you would have to set aside something in the region of 3,000 euros to buy it, would you believe? So, well, wonder if it's actually worth. It's probably not worth that, is it really? At the end of the day, but we'll see. We'll see how good it is when we get to that point. So, right, let's kick off with the 16-year-old. Right, okay, so this is the Master of Malt 16-year-old. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Quite a sort of straw-like, macerated fruit nose, apricots, citrus, quite fresh. It's got that sort of space-ID green fruit note going on. A little bit of breadiness, a little bit of richness, a little bit of maltiness. There's a little bit of an edge there. There's a sort of an edge to that barley note and a little bit of spice as well. Can really smell the tannins actually, and the tannins are quite grainy. It's got a lovely intensity, it has to be said. Great nose. Really well balanced, and like I said, considering there was only a very small dollop left in the bottle, the seal on that must have been bloody good, because I'm getting no sort of detrimental notes, shall we say. So let's see what that's right. Slightly creamy to start off with. The oak is really still quite tannic, quite grainy, quite bitter actually on the finish, but there's enough of that kind of like sort of malt and straw-like barley, macerated apricot. Lovely aftertaste. We're getting that lovely kind of sawdusty oak coming through. It does taste actually quite mature, it has to be said. Yeah, it's a bit mass, it's a bit grippy, but you know, overall, I mean, the balance on that is really pretty impressive, and just goes to show that although the distillery itself may well be slightly disorganised and a little bit idiosyncratic, the spirit they make there is pretty bloody good. Let's see what a little water does to it. Okay, so it's kind of lessened the intensity, which is what you would expect. It's fuller, it's got more macerated fruit, less of that sort of malt, less of the straw, less of the graininess from the oak. It's got a little bit more vanilla, but still a pleasant nose. See what pass right now. More maltiness, more bready, more typicity, shall we say, or typicity of Ben Nevis. Really malty. There's a little bit of a confected note just on the finish, which is just a little irritating slightly. But again, overall, I think that's a really impressive cask, it has to be said. Right, okay, so let's move on to the white port cask. Now, look at the colour of that, will you? I mean, does that look like it's been mature, that it's been aged in white port? I mean, when I actually did my tasting notes, it's completely blind. I was in Oloroso territory. I wonder whether I still am. I can see where I was going with the Oloroso, and this is the thing about when you're tasting completely blind, you kind of pick up on a note an aroma, and you just kind of follow that, and you end up going down the rabbit hole of. But it is winey, and it does feel a little bit Oloroso-y, but it's not quite heavy enough for Oloroso. There's plenty of macerated apple, white fruit, apricot, quite citric, quite taut. It's quite a dark white port, if you see what I mean. A lot of white port finishes and matured whiskies, although I can't say I've had an awful lot of them, do tend to add that sort of lighter dried fruit element, and whereas this has got really dark, very impressive, really intense. Yeah, I like that. Let's see what the pass like. Dry, quite treacly in actual fact, and again raisinated, or maybe more sultana-y kind of dried fruit. But I can see where I was going with the Oloroso on this. I mean, you know, it really is a dead ringer for an Oloroso, but knowing it's a white port, you kind of like can pick out, like I said, the sort of the oxidised white fruit, the apricot, the citrus, and there is a little bit of a, not quite such a darkness as you, I mean, although not every Oloroso cask gives you a dark sherry character, but this does have a kind of a lightness to it. Not getting a huge amount of distillery character. There is a sort of a maltiness, there's a richness, and I don't think, and that's the thing with Ben Nevis, you never kind of get away from that weight of character, that sort of sturdy spirit character, shall we say. Maybe a little breadiness on the finish. Maybe I'm kind of looking for it to a certain extent. But it's quite herbal, and that, like I said, I mean, you know, tasting that blind, you know, it's very easy to go down the sort of like the Oloroso route, because it does have that kind of, you know, character. But when you know exactly what it is, you can sort of go, okay, I can see the sort of like the lighter white port notes, but still it's pretty dark for a white port finish, it has to be said, or white port matured. Let's see what the nose is like now. Okay, that's lightened it. Now the problem is once you've gone down the whole Oloroso route, you're just kind of like, you're there, you know, you're convinced it's sherry, but it's now saying a lot more white port. You know, it's more of that sort of oxidised sort of white fruits, apple, pear, a little bit of dark honey. That's lovely. A little bit of straw coming through. Again, loads of Ben Nevis-y, malty, bready notes. I mean, there is kind of so much Ben Nevis character that's now coming through. It's amazing, and it's amazing how well it obviously deals with being aged in things other than American oak. And we'll obviously see when we get closer towards the end of the tasting how well it, or if it did, how well it deals with sherry. I'll give them that away. But anyway, this is really still quite dark for a white port finish, or maturity, fully matured white port. Let's see what it passes on. Softer, fuller, oily, bready, doughy. Quite dry though, the finish has dried out quite considerably. It's quite tannic, but it's not that sort of overt grippy tannins. It's more a kind of a dusty tannin which kind of slowly sort of dries things out. Again, plenty of oxidised white fruits, sultana, a little bit of raisin. I mean, stunning cask, it has to be said. I mean, unbelievably complex. And again, plenty of distillery character. It's not been wiped out by the cask. Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to the first sherry matured Ben Nevis. This is the 15-year-old single cask refill sherry puncheon. Let's see what the nose gives us on this one, shall we? Now, A, it's refilled, B, it's a puncheon. It's a big cask. I think it's even bigger than a butt, I think, if memory serves me correct. So the sherry influence is quite light, quite aromatic. Again, it's got quite a maltiness and almost kind of wheaty kind of character, wheaty, dark character. Slightly herbal, aromatic, walnut. There's a little bit of rose petal as well, which is quite a surprise at 15. Quite aromatic. Yeah, that's again really well balanced, and I think that's partly down to the fact that it's a refill cask, it's a large cask, so that the sherry influence is not going to be sort of too OTT. I'm amazed at that youthful rose petal note is kind of quite noticeable, and it's not a kind of Mari kind of note. It is youthful, but it's not sort of like raw and Mar-like. It adds to the complexity, to be honest with you, and just goes to show that sort of, again, Ben Nevis, the character of Ben Nevis is very, very difficult to subdue. It's going to come through pretty much no matter what, I think. Anyway, let's see what that's like. Dusty, quite tannic, quite drying on the finish, bit masked. That combination of dry tannins and alcohol is certainly making my mouth water, it has to be said, but it's kind of stops things a bit abruptly. It's quite chocolatey, again, malty, bready, plenty of Ben Nevis character, nippy spices, raisins, sultana, a little bit of prune possibly. But again, we're not in the sort of like the dark Oloroso, we're in that kind of light Oloroso kind of end of the spectrum. And again, it's balanced. I mean, you know, I go on and on about the balance, certainly with the sherried whiskey. You just don't want it to be one-dimensional. And this is far from one-dimensional. This is absolutely gorgeous. Like I said, partly due to the fact that the puncheon is refilled and it's a larger cask, so the cask influence is going to be lessened overall. How refilled, I honestly don't know. Yeah, that's really quite lightened it. I mean, the sherry is now sort of very light, right in the background, sort of more sultana, dried grape, and again, the sort of like the Ben Nevis character, that sort of malty, bready kind of character is on full display. Let's see what pass on now. That's softened things up a treat. Not quite so tannic now. The sort of like the alcohol has been tamed. It's lengthened it. It's fuller. Again, the sherry is probably more noticeable on the finish, on the back end. In actual fact, again, it's brought out more of the Ben Nevis character, but the sherry is still there. It's just coming through right on the finish. So overall, the balance is really, really good. And that is what I want. I mean, I don't dislike sherry, never have disliked sherry, but like I keep saying, it's all about sort of, for me, with any whiskey, doesn't matter whether it's been aged in an American oak cask, a sherry cask, a wine cask, whatever, it's all about the balance and, you know, making sure that sort of nothing is kind of overwhelming. Because for me, that's what I want. Right, okay, so we're moving on to the Darkness 17-year-old. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, can we? It's not a sherry monster in actual fact. It is quite dark, but it's quite meaty in actual fact. The malt has got this kind of meaty element to it, so a little bit of bovril, possibly treacle, herbal Oloroso, a lot of coconut as well. I mean, it's a sherry finish, a Palo Cortado finish, and obviously Palo Cortado is a slightly lighter style of whiskey, not slightly lighter style of sherry, of it somewhere between, I suppose, characteristics between sort of a Fino and an Oloroso. It's actually quite a nice nose. Again, quite balanced, not hugely complex, it has to be said. It's pleasant. It's quite peppery now, in actual fact. Now it's had some time in the glass, but still pretty malty, meaty, quite full. Yeah, that's what it tastes like. Thick, malty, very malty, meaty, chunky, a little bit Foursquare possibly. Nice spiciness on the finish, a little bit of vanilla coming through as well, raisinated fruits. Again, not hugely complex, but what it delivers is pleasant, it's balanced. I mean, my experience of the or limited experience of the bottlings that have been done under the Darkness label do have a tendency towards the sherry monster end of the spectrum, but this is certainly not a sherry monster at all. It's really quite balanced. Again, it's not the most complex. It certainly doesn't have the complexity, say, of the previous bottling, but it's still a pleasant whiskey nevertheless. Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to another sherried Ben Nevis, I think. This is the Grindlay's 18-year-old. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? A little rawer than the Darkness. There's a little bit more herbal Oloroso, a little bit more grittiness, a little bit of earthiness. There's possibly a little bit of peat coming through as well. Now I know that the distillery do make a peated malt. I think they bottle it under the, is it McClelland's tradition or something like that, I believe. I probably should have looked that one up, but I think sort of like the distillery did use peat back in the day, and they do this throwback. But so it's got a little bit of peatiness there, not a huge amount, and it's not sort of overtly obvious. It's more wrapped up in that kind of earthiness. There's a little bit of coffee, chicory, hickory, burnt wood. Yeah, it's a little bit more into the sherry. But I do still get some barley, I still get some meatiness and maltiness. Just, I would say it's just about balanced. It's probably one of those sort of whiskies that if I was evaluating to purchase, it would be a question mark. It would be a kind of, you know, I often get sent, you know, a series of samples from, say, an independent bottling company, and you kind of they either get sort of like a tick straight off the bat, and you know, I'm buying that, or they get rejected straight off the bat, and then you got these sort of ones that are kind of like yeah, well, kind of undecided. And sometimes it's kind of like, you know, if I have to make up a minimum order, I'll kind of like sort of go, well, do I want to buy up, you know, half a dozen of that, or should I have 3 of that and maybe 3 of the question mark? You know, it's all a balancing act. You know, it's like life is just a balancing act, isn't it? Anyway, kind of coming back to this, it's a little bit more accented toward the sherry end of the spectrum, but not a bad whiskey at all. And like I said, I have no idea who the hell Grindlays actually are, and I've never come across them since, it has to be said. But, you know, based on this bottling, and well, you can't just base an entire sort of bottling company on one bottling, they've chosen not a bad cask. Let's see what the pass on. Quite soft. I mean, it's 52%, but doesn't really. There's a little bit of a alcohol prickle on the finish, and a little bit of a mouth-watering, but you know what, that kind of adds to the citric kind of element. It's kind of like a little bit of sort of citrus wrapped up in that sort of alcohol, and it's really juicy, and my mouth is watering, and I'm going, but it's not kind of like been pummeled by alcohol. So yes, again, like the palate, it's kind of more emphasised or more in the sherry end of the spectrum. There's plenty of raisinated dried fruits, but there is some maltiness again. It's a little bit simplistic, I will argue, but again, it's all really quite pleasantly balanced. I get a little bit of maltiness, a little bit of spiciness. You know, it's all quite harmonious. I don't really think it needs any. Oh, go on, I'll put, as we've still got plenty of time, I'll put a little drop of water with it. I don't actually think it needs it. I hope it doesn't fall apart once I put a little drop of water with it. Actually, it's emphasised the herbal oloroso, to be honest with you. I mean, this is just one of the wonderful things about whiskey. You put a little drop of water with, and you kind of always have this assumption that it will basically sort of knock back any cask character, bring forward the malt and so on and so forth. And then suddenly, every now and again, you get a bit of a curveball, and it's kind of, well, okay, that's brought out more of the cask, and I'm getting some dark marzipan and a lot less distillery character, although again you kind of feel the weight of the Ben Nevis, the sort of malty weight. Yeah, again, it's not a bad whiskey. Let's go past that. It's quite chocolatey, quite chewy on the finish now, but slightly unexciting, it has to be said. And it probably didn't really need the water, and I've probably done it no favours by adding a little bit of water with it too. But it hasn't sort of fallen apart. It's not suddenly just gone and died. It's still pleasant, but it's kind of not exactly sort of, you know, making the bits tingle. Finally, we've made it to Mr. Taketsuru's cask. Like I said, if you want to purchase this bottle, you're going to have to fork out about €3,000 for it. Is it worth it? Well, let's find out. It's got a lovely maturity, but surprisingly youthful at the same time. I mean, well, maybe that's not surprising because it is 61%. So it's kind of really emphasising that barley and that malt and the slightly dusty oak. It's quite bready again, quite nutty as well. Sort of, I'm getting sort of peanut and smoked walnut and spice, and there's a distinct cask feel to it. It's kind of like not quite, but it is a bit raw cask, if you like. It's kind of, you know what, if this was, this is something sort of like Robin Tuchek and Blackadder would love to bottle, to be honest with you. It has that raw cask kind of feel, but it's not sort of, it's not uber polished, and that's what I'm trying to get at. There's a lovely natural character to this whiskey. Almond paste, herbal spice, malt. I mean, it is very complex. I mean, it's a whiskey that you need to spend time with. You need to examine. You need to kind of go, okay, what am I getting? Because it's not delivering everything at once. It's not sort of like going. It's not a crowd pleasing, one dimensional. Here I am kind of whiskey. It's a whiskey that you need to basically sort of work at, and you know, what am I getting? And you know what? It's subtly complex, and I honestly think Mr. Taketsuru would be quite happy with this, to be honest with you. Now, would I part with $3,000 for this? Of course I bloody wouldn't. It's not worth $3,000 at all. But that's the secondary whiskey market for you. It's an impressive whiskey, but let's see what the price like. oh, you can tell that's alcoholic. I mean, that really is masked, but it's not kind of like, it's not, you don't quite hit a wall, if you like. It kind of creeps up. It's a bit of a dangerous whiskey, really spicy on the finish and the aftertaste, but then that's being emphasised by the alcohol. It's quite tight, as you would expect. It's doughy, it's bready, it's kind of classic Ben Nevis. There's an element of maturity there, a sort of a little bit of sawdust, but it's quite youthful as well. Got plenty of barley and almond paste and grilled nuts. You know what, that's pretty damn intense, and it's kind of almost to a certain extent encapsulates Ben Nevis. It just works with whatever oak you kind of throw at it, and it's that the character is still there. You're just not going to get rid of it. And I'm going to put a little drop of water with it. I mean, I imagine there probably have been some sherry monsters that have been released, but you know, I think the overriding sort of I'm almost kind of summing up before I sum up, but essentially it's kind of like Ben Nevis can deal with whatever you want to throw at it. And let's see what the nose goes now. Oh, that's lovely. That's aromatic. It's kind of aromatic, vanillins, and yeah, okay. It's quite a bit of American oak coming through now. But it's quite fragrant, and actually this is the first bottling that is, or the first sort of bottling that of this flight that has got what you would say fragrant fruit. I mean, that's not a sort of like, you know, a kind of a Ben Nevis attribute really, sort of fragrant fruit, but that has it. You know, that has that sort of almost kind of citric fragrance. You know what, like I said, I think Mr. Taketsuru would have been more than happy with this particular cask. It is stunning. It really is stunning. No two words about it. Let's sort of pass on there. It's soft, but there's still a little bit of a almost kind of rawness there to an extent. Quite bitter on the finish. Maybe not quite so sort of like hallelujah on the palate. It's the oak has kind of gripped it a little bit, it has to be said, and the tannins are slightly bittering. And it's maybe not as impressive on the palate now as it was when it was without any dilution, but still, you know, that was a fantastic whiskey, it has to be said. Like I said, I would, again, neat. It was just really, really complex. With water, maybe that complexity has slightly been mitigated to a certain extent, and of course it's not worth €3,000 at all, but you know, it's a bloody good whiskey at the end of the day. Okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. Well, don't think I'm going to be doing another Ben Nevis episode of the show. I don't think I've got any more Ben Nevis samples knocking around. There might be one or two independent bottlings knocking around in the odd box or two, but certainly I've got nothing of this kind of caliber. So this is another end of the era kind of episode of the show. But well, you know, you just kind of have to sort of go with these things. There's always going to be something else coming along. Anyway, so the Master of Malt 16-year-old, yeah, good whiskey at the end of the day, sort of classically Ben Nevis, really nicely balanced, yeah, American oak, took water well, really quite happy with that, can't argue with that. Bottling number 2, the white port matured, bloody good, stunning. I mean, like I said, you know, really quite dark. You would be forgiven for sort of thinking that this was an Oloroso cask if you were sort of tasting it blind. Well, you know, I'm defending myself here at the end of the day. You know, I thought it was an Oloroso cask when I was tasting it blind, so I'm going to back myself up. Bottling number 3, the sherry puncheon, again really nicely balanced, just the right amount of sherry character, plenty of Ben Nevis character on show, certainly more so when you add a little drop of water, and like I said, it's all about the balance, and that's really what I wanted. The 17-year-old Darkness, yeah, a nice whiskey, again quite well balanced, malty, very rich, not a sherry monster at all. Maybe it's the Palo Cortado rather than it being Oloroso, but still I thought it was really intriguing. Onto the Grindlay's Oloroso 18-year-old, possibly the weakest bottling in the lineup, it has to be said. But that's no disrespect to it. It was up against some serious competition, a bit simple, a bit straightforward, but again I think the balance was quite nice. It had plenty of sherry character, but it still had, or still retained, shall we say, plenty of the Ben Nevis character as well. And the Mr. Taketsuru's cask, like I said, I think Mr. Taketsuru would have been more than happy with that cask. I mean, the nose alone was stunning, it has to be said. It was sort of mature, but it also had this lovely freshness, and it just kind of summed up how well that Ben Nevis can age. It can retain this freshness even at 25 years of age. Part of that was down to the alcohol level, and it certainly emphasised the freshness, and once you put a little drop of water with it, I wouldn't say it kind of went pear-shaped, but it was not quite as intense or complex as what it was when it was neat, but it was still a very good whiskey at the end of the day. So basically what I'm trying to say is that Ben Nevis produces bloody good whiskey, and obviously I don't know whether any of these bottlings are still available. Well, I mean, obviously the Mr. Taketsuru's cask is still available in Poland. Whether you can probably find any of these other ones out and about, of course, is another matter. But so I just thought this was going to be a fun episode of the show, and I've enjoyed it. It's been a bit of a trip down memory lane because it's been a long time since I've tasted any of these, and I've never tasted them at all in one flight, so it's always a bit of fun to do that. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode of the show. It's kind of a bit of a from the vaults episode, as they say, but all that's left to say is good afternoon, and it's just about afternoon. Good dramming.